guys, welcome to the video on chapter 11.3. Today we're going to talk about some of the exceptions to Mendel. Now, up until now, we've been talking a lot about how genes work and how there's dominant and recessive traits, and that's one part of how genes work and what you're going to see, but that's really only a small part of it. Unfortunately, genetics are a lot more complicated than that, and probably a lot of you are getting some suspicions of that because you look around the world, it's not that people have one trait or the other. Oftentimes they have a combination of traits, or they have traits are kind of a mixed blend of different sorts. So what this chapter wants to talk about is it wants to explain some of the other ways that genes can work. The first one, and probably the easiest one to understand, is what we call incomplete dominance. Incomplete dominance basically means that the trait is not recessive or dominant. It's kind of a combination of both. So here's an example of what you can look at. Say you have a red flower here and a white flower over here, and you make them have babies. The result ends up being a bunch of pink flowers. It's a combination of the red and the white, because red and white make pink. Hopefully you guys know that. If not, oh well, I didn't know either until I started doing this. So it's a combination of both. So it would be like with the example with the pea plants, that you get a pea plant that was tall, a pea plant that was short, and you cross them and then got like a pea plant that was medium sized. Essentially, it's not dominant or recessive, it's kind of incomplete. It's a combination of both. And so maybe another way to look at this here is that, say this was big R, and this will be WW, R for red, W for white. So if you have them make babies, you're going to get a bunch of babies that have an R and a W, so RW, 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 and when you have R and W together, you get pink. So that's one other way that Mendel discovered how genetics can work. It's one other way we've discovered, and that hopefully explains a little more of the diversity you see in the world. Now, the next thing is, but I want both traits. Okay, well, you can do that too. There's another idea called codominance. This is when you have both of the traits. So say if you look at the previous example where you had a red flower and a white flower, rather than having a pink flower come out, you have a pink and white flower come out, or a red and white flower pop out. So you have both the white flower color and the red flower color. This is called codominance. So when you see a combination of both traits showing up, we call that codominance. But they're not really mixing together. Like, do you see how this is white and not red or pink? It's not like it combined with the other gene. It's just that the white is appearing here. And in this case, you have the pinkish red color appearing here. So there's a gene here, obviously, for pinkish red, and there's a gene here for white. And they're in the same flower, so it's showing both the pink and the red. This is called codominance. Well, now it gets even more complicated. It's also possible to have multiple alleles of a gene. And what that means is that so far we've been talking about genes as being either tall or short, and there's no in between. Well, imagine now having a gene for being really tall, a gene for being tall, a gene for being, kind of average size, and a gene for being really small. So you have 4 different types of alleles. Well, that's what happens with what's called multiple alleles. The best example of multiple alleles is human blood type, which is why I have this awesome picture over here of human blood. Is that there is, he goes, if you have 2 O alleles, you get an O gene. If you get an O allele and an A allele, you get an A. If for blood, this is all for blood type. Sorry if I didn't specify that beforehand. If you have an O and a B allele, you end up being B blood type. If you have an A and a B allele, you end up being AB blood type. So you see, with human blood types, it's not as simple as dominant and recessive. They actually combined in some ways. They actually have, if you have two O's, you have an O. If you have an A and an O, you have an A. If you have a B and an O, you're a B. And if you have an A and a B, you're AB. This is how multiple alleles works. So again, this gets a little more complicated, but don't worry, you don't have to do Punnett squares of this information because you really can't do Punnett squares of this stuff. I mean, I guess you could, but it would be really challenging and it may not tell you as much as it would with other ideas. The last one is what we call a polygenic trait. What a polygenic trait basically means is that multiple alleles control the same thing. The best example of this is human skin color. If you look around at different humans, you'll notice that humans are not just black or white. They fit the whole color spectrum between those two colors. You have, well, not the whole spectrum, but a lot of it. You're either black, different shades of black, maybe lighter versions. You have some brown colors. You even get some yellow pigmentation in some people as well. He goes, that's caused by what we call a polygenic trait. What that means is that there are multiple genes controlling human skin color, and what combinations of alleles you have from those genes determines what skin color you have. There's not really a good way to show how this works, unfortunately. I wish I could think of something to help you guys understand this idea with a picture or an image, but I couldn't really think of anything. What it really comes down to is a polygenic trait just means it's being controlled by multiple genes. It's like those larger Punnett squares I showed in the last video where you have two different types of genes with four possible alleles. He goes, it just means that there's a lot of potential alleles that control this gene. That control the trait. The reality is that most human and animal genetics are polygenic, meaning that it's not just one allele or another affects how you are. Multiple alleles work together to make you what you are. And that's how you get so much variety. You'll never have to do a Punnett square of a polygenic trait because it's really not possible. We're still trying to figure out what genes control what. And this is actually one of the major areas of study in biology, is trying to figure out what combinations of genes lead to what kind of diseases, what kind of heights, eye colors. And this is what geneticists have been working on ever since Gregor Mendel did his work. Unfortunately for us, it also got a little more complicated too just recently. When most of you guys will know, or at least have some idea, that we sequence the human genome. What that means is that we know where all the genes and all the alleles are at. What we discovered when we did this is that the picture is insanely more complicated than we thought it was. It's probably so complicated that it's going to take us years and hundreds of thousands of supercomputers to really get a good picture of how genetics actually works. And why it's so complicated is because there's one more thing that comes into play with genetics, and that's the environment. The environment can control what genes are being activated and what genes are not being activated. So it can also, because the environment can also turn on and off certain genes. The environment can also make them do more or less. One thing that's been talked about a lot in the United States is if you ever go to the United States, you'll learn the United States has a big problem with obesity, people who are really fat. And being fat is not healthy. But one thing we've learned is that being fat actually changes your genes. A person who is obese actually has different genes being turned on and off than somebody who's skinny. We call this study of how the environment affects genes epigenetics. Now, I'll give you a quick warning. This will not be on your test. I'm talking about epigenetics just because it's a really cool area of genetics that's up and coming right now, and it's the new shiny thing everyone's working on. But the book does want you guys to know, and I think you guys should know this. It can help you out a lot in your lives if you ever go into the field of biology, and it can help you understand what's going on in the world, that the environment plays a role in your genes. So make sure you guys know this information right here. Know that the environment can turn your genes on and off. It can also make them do more or less. It can make them, like, say you have a gene that makes your skin very dark. For example, if you're not in sunlight very often, that gene will slowly begin to do less and less work, causing your skin to become lighter and lighter. However, if you're in more sunlight, it'll go the other direction, in the sense that you'll get more and more, that gene will be working harder and harder to make your skin darker and darker, is a good example. Now, all this is the study of epigenetics. But as I said, guys, don't worry about this word. This word is just to show you that there is a whole area here, but this is not talked about in your book. Just make sure you know this part right here. And that's pretty much it, guys. That covers chapter 11.3. Hopefully, that'll help you guys understand the content from this chapter and better understand what's going on. I'll see you guys in class, and if you have any questions, feel free to come see me.